I want to start with some insight into your interest in natural movement and its relationship with mind. Can you share with us how you learned about that and how movement affects mind?
Yeah, I mean, I I started martial arts when I was 6 years old. I grew up on the end of a dirt road, climbing trees and running around and roughhousing with my cousins and my brother. So it's kind of a theme throughout my life. I started doing gymnastics when I was 15, then became a gymnastics coach, and then found parkour when I was 23. So I've been doing that for 16 years now. And when I found parkour, I was finishing up my degree in anthropology, which I actually didn't end up finishing, but I was pursuing a degree in anthropology. I was very close to finishing it, and right away it sort of called back to me understanding the way that people moved in other cultures and kind of the habitual forms of movement play that we saw, or the cross-cultural forms of movement play, and reading epic literature from mythological literature and the way that heroes were portrayed as moving. And so I've always had that for a very long time. I've been interested in that intersection. And then as I've dived deep into the study of motor learning and natural movement, I've come to really understand that the mind itself is really deeply interwoven into the body. They're not separable. And it's a kind of illusion that we have adopted in the West, that they're separable. But if we look at the evolutionary origins of cognition, they come out of motor control. The purpose of a brain is to control a moving body. We see this in the sea squirt, which is an animal that has a mobile life phase in which it has a developed nervous system, and then a sessile phase, a phase in which it attaches itself to a rock and lives much more like a plant, and it actually digests its nervous system at that point in its development. So if you start to dig into the metaphorical and basis of language as well, you'll actually see that the way that we think is framed in references that have to do with our motor capacities. So we ask, do we understand something? Do you grasp what I'm saying? Do you have an optimal grip on it?
I see you.
We're constantly doing this because one of the best ways to think about cognition is it's a kind of simulation of motor actions within the brain. Even if you're thinking in words, right? That's like subvocalization, like you're making the shapes, or you're imagining the shapes that your tongue would make to produce those words. And language evolves most likely out of gesturing. So at every level, we're really movement animals that have developed cognition on top of it. And consciousness essentially probably starts as a way to help us decide on motor pathways. So that's maybe a good start on how mind and movement come together.
Yeah, excellent. Have you read a book called Philosophy in the Flesh by George Lakoff?
I have not. Sounds quite interesting.
Okay, yes, it's very closely related to what you're talking about there.
Yeah.
What's the difference between movement and exercise, and why is it important to focus more so on movement?
Yeah. I mean, movement is anything you do with your body that changes its position, right? Or invest an effort to hold yourself in position, right? You're moving all the time. To not move is to be dead, because even when you're still, your heart is beating, your lungs are expanding, contracting, blood and lymph are moving through your tissues, cells are moving, the immune system's moving things around, neurotransmitters are moving up and down. So some aspect of you is always moving until you're dead. So movement is much, much, much more widely encompassing than exercise. And exercise is really it's a concept that in many ways it becomes widely important and applicable only after we become sedentary, because the physical demands of life prior to sedentism are sufficient to meet the fitness needs of everybody, right? So you don't have to exercise. You don't think about exercise because you're just moving, right? You're plowing fields and picking fruit and gardening and, moving animals around. And so it's only once people have the capacity to engage in a kind of luxurious sedentary lifestyle that they notice that their body's becoming healthy and they have to exercise. Now, exercise does pre-exist that because, knights engage in exercises in order to train themselves specifically for the demands of war. So the big difference, like martial arts are really an interesting place where exercises develop, because the difference between a farmer and a warrior is that the work that a farmer does every day is the work that a farmer does every day, right? Like the plowing is the job, right? Yeah. But a knight only engages in lethal combat in very rare circumstances. If the thing that you would prepare your body for is the thing that you're literally doing every day, then there's no separation, right? There's no, like a farmer doesn't need to be farm fit, right? He doesn't need a farm fitness program, because the farm fitness program is just the farming. But a professional soldier actually has a need for an exercise program, because you might sit around in a barracks for ages, right? Not doing anything. So you need to sustain the body and craft the body such that it's good at doing the things that are specific to demands that you might face, right? So now you have some kind of exercise that becomes important. So wherever the kind of potential demands of a life, or the demands that you're training for, or the demands that you're aimed at, are very different from the daily demands, then you have a kind of necessity for exercise as a bridge to prepare you for that.
Yeah.
But because so many of us now have lifestyles that are that have no movement demand, right? Yeah. We've had to adopt the idea of exercise, and we've become blind to movement as a broader category. So there's a classic thing is there are pictures of gyms where the cardio room is on the upper story, and they have escalators that take you up to the cardio room. So people go up an escalator in order to get on a stairmaster, right?
Yeah.
Because we mentalized fitness as a thing that happens once you sort of start a specific activity. And we have sort of dumped the rest of our life into some other category that doesn't have any relevance to our health or fitness.
Yeah.
And that's the wrong way to think about it, because just on a very practical fitness level, most people's largest goal in exercise is body composition, right?
Yeah.
And you could burn a couple 300 calories in a workout, right? But somebody who's very physically active throughout the day might burn an extra 1,500 calories. Right. So the impact of non-exercise physical activity can be, 5 times as much as the impact of what we actually do in the gym.
Yeah.
So we have to take this, and it's also impacting every aspect of the body, and not just the body, the mind and our emotional center. So things like gardening, things like walking, things like hunting, things like, play, playing with your kids, having physical hobbies rather than the non-physical hobbies, bowling or billiards or ping pong rather than video games. Like all these things are aspects of the movement diet of the individual, and all of them contribute to health when compared to more sitting screen time as we're engaged in right now.
Yeah. You've spoken of the divorce between stimulation and nutrition, and how the two have become increasingly separated in modern times. How has stimulation been divorced from nutrition?
Yeah, so I actually use the word nourishment, which is slightly different, but we can go into the difference between those. But this is actually an insight that I got from a good friend of mine, Stephan Guyenet, who is the author of a book called The Hungry Brain. He's a neurobiologist from the University of Washington who or he was educated at the University of Washington, and he did his baccalaureate work on leptin in rat brains and its impact on obesity. So in any event, he was trying to understand why we have this obesity epidemic. And he was talking to me about it. And he kind of summarized it as what the food industry has done is they've divorced flavor from nutrition, right? So the idea there is that it used to be that if you wanted something sweet, you had to eat fruit. If you wanted these flavors, you had to eat things that contained lots of important nutrients. When you eat an apple, you get not just sugar, you get tons of phytochemicals and fiber and water.
Yeah.
But when you eat a apple flavored Jolly Rancher, it's just an artificial flavor and the sweet, right? And the sugar. Yeah. And that deranges our normal eating behaviors. And this is the biggest reason why people are suffering, right? The food industry is really designed to create addictive products that will stimulate you to overeat. And when he said that, I just had this kind of insight that describes essentially one of the best ways to win at capitalism, and we can see it in any number of other fields, right? If you can take a basic reward pathway that we evolved that helped us seek out resources that are important in our evolutionary environment, and you can hyperstimulate that pathway in the cheapest manner possible, then you can create addictive behavior in people. And the cheap thing is just like, you want to minimize your costs, right?
Yeah.
So if I can get you to buy a candy that takes me 5 cents to make for $1, and it doesn't go bad, right? So there's no wastage,
yeah,
right? Then that's just has a massive market advantage over something like an apple, which has much higher transportation costs. It's much heavier. It's much more easily bruised. There's much more wastage. So I thought to myself, okay, so if the food industry is divorced from nutrition, then pornography is divorcing sexuality from relationships, right? Yeah. And video games are divorcing thrill from physicality, right?
Yeah.
Like, what's the difference between a video game and ping pong or bowling or football or soccer, right? Or capture the flag. Like, all those things require you to get up and move your body, whereas a video game doesn't. But you can have this experience of like extreme sort of thrill and like extraordinary like skill in video games, but it's actually not transferable outside of that video game, or very minimally transferable. And people will play a video game for 16 hours at a time. It's also not self-limiting, right? That's the other thing, is like, if you eat an apple, you won't eat too many calories of apples generally, because the fiber and the water limit your ability to consume it. But you can eat tons of Jolly Ranchers, right? You can massively increase that. And it's the same thing for a video game. Like, if you're having a thrilling, fun game of football, like, it's self-limiting. You're going to get tired. You're not going to be able to continue it.
Yeah.
But you can play, you can play Halo for 16 hours. So there's no self-limiting factor. And then, social media is a way of essentially, I've heard it described as the dopamine drip, right? You can those little like signs, they're designed to manipulate your dopamine system. They're a sort of like a Pavlovian representation of social approval. And when you go on there, you're doing that. So you're divorcing it from real life interaction. Right? So there's so much information that's available to you when you're actually talking to somebody in person that's being stripped out. And there's so much more necessity, again, for actually learning to behave nicely. Like, look at how terrible people are to each other on on social media. It's because, again, all the self-limiters are taken off, right?
Yeah.
Like you can be the worst person in the world on social media, and if you're anonymous, you have zero consequences. You go do that at your local church, like you're going to get punched in the nose, or banned from the service, right? So that's the concept. And basically, I think that we all face. My friend Frank Furnsich has described this as the pornosphere, or the pornosphere, right? All of life is sort of these hyper stimulating products. We're constantly exposed to them, and they're designed to manipulate our behavior in ways that serve corporate interests, but they are not good for human well-being.
Yeah.
And so we need practices, and we need cultivated character to help us sort of escape from those loops.
In today's society, careers have become ever more specialized, perhaps for the sake of efficiency and to cope with the demands of the ever more complex technology we have become dependent on. Mm-hmm. How does specialization limit the self?
Yeah. So this is another key idea that I've been thinking about for a while, but the basic idea is that, I mean, again, it's funny. I feel like I spend a lot of time on this podcast critiquing capitalism. And I actually think that capitalism is probably the best system in many ways for organizing the flow of resources that we have. But it has certain failure points, and we tend to either demonize it or make it divine, right? Like I think a lot of libertarian types basically worship the market. I think it's God and will fix everything. So I think we need systems that balance out these problems. Well, one of the problems is that essentially, just like a corporation has an incentive to sell you something that it can sell you as cheaply as possible, that will result in as much repetitive behavior from you as possible, and those things are, and so therefore, something that's hyperstimulating, that's bad for your well-being, but it's good for the corporation's bottom line. In the same sense, capitalism works off of comparative advantage, right? If there's something that I'm 1% better than anybody else at, then it makes sense from a purely capital generation standpoint for me to spend all of my time doing that one thing. And comparative advantage is important, and it's good. It's like, okay, so let's say that you have a farm and I have a farm, right? And your farm is on rich soiled bottomland, and so you can grow you can grow vegetables really well and grains really well. And my farm is like a big sprawling pastures up in the mountains, right? So I'm gonna be able to not raise a big garden, but I can keep lots of animals. Okay, so now I'm gonna have milk and meat, and you're gonna have fruit and vegetables. So now we can trade, and it's really good for both of us to trade. We're better off when we trade. The problem is that at a certain point you start getting smaller and smaller, and then you create a kind of monocrop of the individual. So the incentives of the system tend towards the production of human beings who only do one thing, because everything else is irrelevant to it. So I have this theory that the problem that we have with self-esteem is not that we weren't taught to love ourselves. Like, and this is really basically just now abundant in the literature. Self-esteem training doesn't help people. It makes them narcissistic, and they stay insecure. Security actually comes from gaining character, right? Growing. And you only gain character by exposing yourself to a broad variety of things and developing a broad set of competencies and ability to contribute in multiple ways. So, there's this classic thing in the fitness community: do you even lift, bro? Right? It's like the only value you have is like how much heavy you can lift, how big your muscles are in this worldview. And I think that capitalism is basically, do you even earn, bro? And so for a lot of people, their value as a human being has been collapsed into two categories: how much do they make, and how sexy are they? And I think this is just an insufficient foundation for the scaffolding up of a real human self right? And so the problem isn't that we don't have self-esteem. The problem is we don't have selves worth esteeming.
It's pretty intense. What would you suggest people do about that?
Develop practices that make them into broad, diverse human beings. So you know, I think of natural movement as a permaculture of self, right? It's a permaculture of movement. Sorry, it's a like permaculture of the body. That's what I meant to say. A permaculture of the body. So you can imagine that, you know, I'm probably most talented in movement as a martial artist, right? So I could devote all my time to being a martial artist, and that's where I would have the highest leverage to, you know, gain fame or make money. But I think, like a field that's only devoted to soybeans, I'm much more likely to burn out and break down over time. So when I practice something that includes martial arts with parkour, with a movement lifestyle, with playing with objects, I always have kind of sources of nutrition that I can go to and ways to sort of balance out my body and my system. And I think that it's much more developmental of my character, actually, as well as being much more sustainable over time. Now you can extend the analogy and say, well, what would it be like to have a sort of permaculture orientation towards your life, right? So you have your area of comparative advantage, but your goal with that is not to sort of just generate the most capital, because capital isn't the point. The point is well-being. The point is to use that point to open up the capacity for broader self-development, right? And that's where your well-being is. So don't look at the bank account as the end game, right? It's just one piece that contributes to the overall development of the self. And that's where I actually think that fundamentally what we need is almost religious, right? I think that America, at least, worked fairly well when we had a strong civic culture, a strong religious culture, and a strong set of norms around democracy. And all of that were in relationship to a market economy. And it has broken down as we've become unchurched, and not only unchurched, there's no bowling clubs anymore. There's no Rotary Club anymore. Like our civic culture, which, you know, de Tocqueville's Americans is all about, or Democracy in America is all about the fact that this is the unique aspect of Americans, is that we have these strong civic cultures. So I think that I don't think the answer is a revolution against the capitalist system in the sense of like, let's replace it economically. The answer is a revolution in let's become less dependent on it psychologically, and let's create institutions that are oriented towards the other aspects of securing human well-being.
Yeah, sounds good. Hey, Rafe Kelley, thank you for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, absolutely.
Listeners can find Rafe Kelley on his YouTube channel titled Rafe Kelley, or via his website evolvemoveplay.com, or on Instagram.